Dusko Popov was a real spy who played out a deadly game as a double agent in World War II. He was critical to the success of D-Day. He robbed the Nazis of thousands of dollars in cash. He supplied vital intelligence to the Allies about Hitler's flying bombs. And he almost succeeded in preventing the Japanese attack on Pearl Harbor. This is a high-stakes story of deceit and delusion, and a tale of personal excess in the bar, the casino, and the bedroom. This is the true story of Dusko Popov, whose actions influenced the outcome of the Second World War. For that, he will be lauded as one of the most important players in the history of the Secret War. Dusko Popov grew up in one of Europe's most beautiful cities, Dubrovnik, in Croatia, then part of Yugoslavia. He had a privileged upbringing. He had wealthy, well-connected parents. Dusko wanted for nothing and was a popular boy, having many friends and great self-confidence. His rich father insisted Dusko attend the finest European schools. After leaving school, his passions were fast cars and fast women. But he'd also been a star pupil and had become fluent in Italian, German, and French. At 24, he ended up in Freiburg, Germany, to study for a PhD in law. It was here that he met a young man from Hamburg, Johann Jebsen. Popov called him Johnny. It was the beginning of a friendship that would lead them both down roads they could never have dreamed of. 1936 was a strange time to be a student in Germany. In the streets, swastikas were multiplying, and so was the hatred towards Jews. In Freiburg, the liberal Popov was outraged by the public harassment of Jews by the Nazis. Popov and Jebsen often defied Nazi rules and drank coffee in Jewish-owned cafes. But the day after he obtained his PhD, he was betrayed and arrested by the Gestapo. Jebsen alerted Dusko's father, who made use of his contacts in the Yugoslav government. The Nazis released Popov, but he was ordered to leave Germany. He got out just in time.
Am 1. September 1939 erklärt der Führer im Reichstag: Polen hat heute Nacht zum ersten Mal auf unserem eigenen Territorium auch mit bereits regulären Soldaten geschossen. Seit 5:45 Uhr wird jetzt zurückgeschossen.
In September 1939, Germany invaded Poland. Two days later, Britain declared war on Germany. If Hitler was to confront Britain, he would need information about this new enemy. He turned to his intelligence-gathering organization, the Abwehr. They already had a small network of secret agents in Europe, but they needed more and began a recruitment drive. It would lead them to Dusko Popov. In 1940, Popov was running a small private law firm back in Dubrovnik, in neutral Yugoslavia. On the 4th of February, he received a telegram from his old friend Johnny Jebsen, asking if they could meet urgently in Belgrade. They met in a hotel where Johnny revealed that he had joined the Abwehr. Popov was shocked, but then incredulous when Jebsen asked him to join and become a spy for the Nazis. Popov spent the longest night of his life thinking about the strange offer from his old friend. He was surprised, but somehow excited. Jebsen was suggesting that they become double agents, working for the Nazis while secretly undermining them. He knew that if he was caught, he would pay with his life. He later wrote,
"No use going over the same ground 50 times. Facts don't change. But there was one piece missing to complete the game. Would the British play?"
So the next morning, he went to the British Embassy in Belgrade and offered them his services. They sent him to the British Passport Office, which was in reality the headquarters for British military intelligence, MI6. MI6 spent 2 days vetting Popov and then accepted his offer. He called Johnny Jebsen and told him he was ready to play the game. Dusko Popov, double agent, was born. Codename Ivan for the Germans, codename Tricycle for the British. At his first meeting with the Abwehr, Popov lied that he had friends in high places in England. They provided him with a cover story. He was to head up an import-export business between Yugoslavia and England. The Abwehr made Johnny Jebsen his handler. He supplied Popov with lengthy questionnaires concerning British military strength and morale. Popov gave them to MI6 for completion and then handed them back to the Abwehr. The family driver, Bozidar, had volunteered to be Popov's driver. Popov was amazed. Bozidar's laziness was legendary, and he was right to be suspicious. Popov's old friend and Abwehr handler, Johnny Jebsen, discovered that the Abwehr had recruited Bozidar to spy on Popov, and might soon discover his links to MI6. Dusko Popov was left with no choice. Two days later, Bozidar was found shot dead near railway warehouses in Belgrade. The police concluded that Bozidar had been killed in a bungled robbery. Popov had got away with it. Lisbon was the espionage capital of Europe during the war. It was a spy nest. The city was swarming with suspicious characters, deserters, conscientious objectors, refugees, and adventurers, all rubbing shoulders. Bars, cafes, and restaurants were infested with agents of all backgrounds and origins. Although Portugal was officially neutral, the Germans had a significant presence there. So the British ensured that they too had a strong covert delegation. It was in this atmosphere that Popov was sent to Lisbon by the Abwehr in November 1940. When Dusko Popov arrived at Lisbon airport, his eye was taken by a pretty girl who kept winking at him. Her name was Elizabeth Sarbach, and she'd been sent to collect him. He followed her to a waiting black limousine, got in, and together they sped off. The car was driven to a large villa where a tall, aristocratic man was waiting to greet them. It was Elizabeth's boss and Popov's Abwehr controller, Ludovico von Karstoff. Real name, Ludwig Kramer von Auenrode. Popov instinctively liked von Karstoff, who shared his fondness for the company of women, and took him under his wing. But as soon as he had the chance, Dusko Popov made sure he registered with the British Passport Office, which, as in Belgrade, was the cover operation for British military intelligence, MI6. Neutral Portugal and neighbouring Spain were also safe places to meet his old friend Johnny Jebsen, whose job was to keep him informed of German progress in the war. He told Popov how the German people resented living hand to mouth while factories churned out thousands of planes and tanks, about disloyalty within the Abwehr ranks, and he revealed news of a new technology German scientists called the microdot. Popov would come to be familiar with the microdot, but in the meantime simply passed the information straight to MI6. Popov was busy building his cover as a businessman representing import-export interests in Yugoslavia when the Abwehr delivered airline tickets to his hotel. His flight left Lisbon on the 20th of December 1940 for London. Hitler's Luftwaffe were trying to bomb the British into submission. But while the Blitz was the most visible sign of the war, the Abwehr were secretly laying the foundations for occupation. And Popov was key to the strategy. They instructed him to find out if there were influential Nazi sympathizers in Britain who they could use to support an invasion. Popov realized that this was the opportunity he'd been waiting for. He would look the British in the eye and tell them how he could help them win the war. As he was driven into the capital on the 20th of December 1940, Popov was confronted for the first time with the horrors of war. As he watched the city burn and the people bury their dead, it only reinforced his commitment to the cause. He wrote,
"If I had any doubts, moral or ethical, about what I was doing, they vanished when I experienced the Blitz at first hand and how the British were standing up to it."
His car pulled up at the Savoy Hotel on the Strand, where he was greeted by a smartly dressed man. It would be this man's job to vet Popov and report whether he could be trusted. MI6 in Lisbon and Belgrade had already briefed Robertson and the Double Cross Committee about Popov. Even so, there were many on the committee who didn't trust him. he could be working for the Germans. The committee were not prepared to take any chances. Popov had passed his first test. Tar Robertson knew that he had the potential to become the Double Cross Committee's most valuable agent. He had neutral nationality, could travel freely all over Europe, and had the trust of the Abwehr. He threw himself body and soul into working with the British. In turn, they trained him in the arts of spycraft, such as the use of invisible ink, tips and tricks on breaking and entering, and the use of evasion techniques to avoid being followed. He had to absorb enormous amounts of information and equally enormous amounts of disinformation. His job would be to provide the Germans with bogus intelligence about British military strength and planning. On New Year's Eve 1940, Popov was invited to a society party given at the home of Major General Stuart Mingus, the head of MI6, known as C. There, he was introduced to the cabaret artist, Friedel Gardner. She was the most beautiful woman he'd seen since arriving in England. But as their conversation got interesting, Mingus interrupted and asked Popov to his study. Mingus told him in no uncertain terms that he didn't like him. But he had the makings of a very good spy, but had better learn to take orders, or he'd become a very dead spy. Popov left the party contemplating Mingus' words, but dreaming about Friedel Gardner's eyes. He would meet her again very soon. Popov was almost ready to return to Portugal. But first he was introduced to Lieutenant Commander Ewan Montague. It was his job to assemble a cover story that would convince the Germans that Popov had used his time in England well. Montague made sure Popov met several military officers and high-ranking civil servants that would show the Abwehr he was plugged into the highest quality sources. To enhance his credibility still further, he gave him the names of 3 lords whom the British already knew were sympathetic to the Nazis. Then on the 2nd of January 1941, he boarded a KLM flight back to Lisbon. It was the beginning of the deadliest of spy games. Back in Lisbon, he met von Karstov's assistant, Elizabeth, at the Hotel Palacio. He checked in, dressed for dinner, then made his way to the casino, and in particular, the roulette table. There he waited for Elizabeth to play 3 numbers. The numbers revealed the date and the time of his next meeting with von Karstov. At that meeting, von Karstov questioned Popov thoroughly about his trip to England. He told him about his high-level political contacts and began supplying false information such as bogus details of a new RAF attack aircraft called the Beaufighter. Popov worked the Lisbon-London route immaculately for 2 months. The Abwehr were keen to know as much as possible about the Beaufighter. Equally, he was able to pass to them more and more fake intelligence, such as the incorrect location of British minefields. To alleviate the unquestionable stress, Popov also made sure he made time to let his hair down. When in Lisbon, he had the companionship of a shapely Brazilian blonde called Maria Helena. When in London, he was on everyone's A-list. Here's an extract from his diary from 1 week in February 1941. Evening cocktails, American bar, Savoy. Dinner at Mirabelle. Met at Mayfair Lounge. Dinner at Claridge's. Dined in an out club. His hectic social life alarmed his superiors, so they arranged for an old flame to make contact. He didn't know that Friedel Gardner was also working for MI6, but they knew this agent they called Gelatine would be perfect at keeping Dusko occupied. Popov would find her company stimulating. As he got used to the London-Lisbon routine, the casino of the Hotel Palacio became his headquarters, and it was here that the James Bond legend was born. A British agent, ordered to keep an eye on Popov, witnessed much of his behavior at the casino bar and at the baccarat table. The agent was Ian Fleming. But in March 1941, as Popov arrived yet again at the Hotel Palacio, he was instructed to report immediately to von Karstoff. Had he been discovered? Popov hadn't been rumbled after all. But von Karstoff gave him some terrible news. Neutral Yugoslavia had been bombed and then invaded by Germany.
Rechts und links der Straßen die Trümmer einer geschlagenen Armee.
Coming from Dubrovnik, Popov was officially on the German side, and he could continue to work for them. But back home, his entire family were now at risk. He was in little doubt that if he was exposed, the Gestapo would have no pity on them. And then von Karstoff told him of new orders from Berlin. Hitler was making plans to go to war with America. He instructed the Abwehr to gather information about the United States and was keen to establish a new network of spies there. Von Karstoff told Popov that he'd been selected to lead that mission. But Popov had an idea. The next time he was in London, he explained to the Double Cross Committee how he could turn the trip to the United States to their advantage. Popov had already convinced the Abwehr that he had a bogus network of agents operating in Britain. He told them he'd been paying them out of his own pocket. Here at the Double Cross Committee's HQ, he told them he'd convinced the Abwehr to take on the costs themselves. Popov would then launder the money in the United States and reroute it to MI6. The Abwehr would be paying cash straight into MI6 coffers. The Double Cross Committee were amazed at the simplicity of the idea they called Plan Midas. Popov returned to Lisbon to sell the idea to von Karstoff. It worked, and von Karstoff agreed to have the cash before Popov's departure for America. In return, he handed Popov a single sheet of typewritten paper. Visible only with a microscope, the microdot hid a dossier with a huge number of questions about the American military beneath a full stop. Von Karstoff asked Elizabeth to fetch a bottle of champagne, and together they toasted Popov's new assignment. Before leaving for the USA, Popov contacted his old friend Johnny Jebsen one last time. Jebsen told him something intriguing. He had been asked by the Abwehr on behalf of their allies, the Japanese, to go to the port of Taranto in Italy and find out why a recent British airstrike had been such a success. It turned out that this was the first ever attack launched entirely from aircraft carriers. Popov was puzzled. He wondered why the Japanese were so interested in an operation launched in this way. He took another look at his United States mission questionnaire. It requested detailed information about a US naval base in the Pacific Ocean called Pearl Harbor. Why would the Japanese want to know about the base? And why would they want to know about attacks from aircraft carriers? Popov put 2 and 2 together and realized the Japanese were planning to attack Pearl Harbor. There was now real urgency about Dusko Popov's trip to America. On the 10th of August 1941, he took the equivalent of $40,000 from von Karstoff for Plan Midas and boarded a plane for the USA. When he landed, he went straight to the headquarters of the FBI. They'd been told by the British that Popov was on his way, but they were not at all welcoming. At the time, the FBI was headed by the formidable J. Edgar Hoover, who considered himself to be above the law and trusted few people, particularly foreigners.
There is nothing mysterious about the manner in which the Federal Bureau of Investigation works. Its formula is a simple one: intensive training, carefully investigated and highly efficient personnel, plus rigid requirements in regard to conduct, intelligence, and integrity.
Hoover believed that being a double agent made Popov doubly untrustworthy. He had no intention of granting Popov an audience, and instead sent a team of agents to question him. The agents were fascinated by the microdot technology, but not at all by Pearl Harbor. Popov was treated with mistrust and ordered to leave. From then on, he was followed and watched everywhere he went. It went on for weeks. It was an impossible position for Popov. He couldn't warn the FBI about Pearl Harbor, nor could he conduct his fake spying activities on behalf of the Abwehr. To take his mind off the FBI, he got on a plane and headed for the fashionable ski slopes of Sun Valley.
I skied from early morning to dark. It didn't work. My nights passed in a blur of alcohol and sex. But it was easier to grin in company than to sob alone in New York.
But he knew he couldn't drown his sorrows forever. He headed back to New York City, and it was there that he bumped into an old friend at a party. A Hollywood star he'd befriended before the war in Paris, Simone. He resurrected their pre-war relationship, and they began a passionate affair. He and Simone were seen at all the big New York parties. And since Popov was running out of money, here was someone who could fund his champagne lifestyle. Then out of the blue, the FBI contacted Popov. Hoover wanted to see him. Had his message about Pearl Harbor got through after all? On On the 24th of September, Dusko Popov walked back into the FBI offices in New York City. He was escorted to a small back office. Hoover was seated at a desk. He didn't get up. There were no introductions and no preliminaries. Hoover ordered Popov to sit down and began to rant, pounding the desk with his fist as he attacked Popov's reputation. Hoover told him to leave his office, but Popov refused. He lit a cigarette and began a spirited defense of his position, describing the microdot questionnaire, and warned him of the plot to attack Pearl Harbor. Hoover accused him of being a German agent, saying, "You're begging for information to sell to your German friends so you can make money and be a playboy." Popov, seething with rage, tried to defend himself. But Hoover had heard enough, telling Popov, "Are you trying to teach me my job?" As Popov got to his feet, he snapped. "I don't think anyone could teach you anything." He stormed out of the office and slammed the door.
I walked away from the FBI building with a knot in my stomach. Hoover acted as though it were his divine right to fabricate whatever tale he pleased.
Popov soon forgot about his detractors in the FBI when he received a telegram from Lisbon instructing him to meet von Karstov's assistant, Elizabeth, in Rio de Janeiro, Brazil. Popov flew to Rio at the end of October and began many days of meetings with Elizabeth and Abwehr agents. They weren't concerned that Popov had made no contact with his German handlers in Lisbon and no progress on the Pearl Harbor questionnaire. They simply gave him new instructions and a new questionnaire, hidden beneath a microdot. His mission? To investigate why the Americans were so keen to find sources of uranium ore in South America. He had no idea that both the Americans and Germans were in a race to produce nuclear weapons. Popov decided to return to New York by sea. But just 3 days from port, shocking news reached his ship. The Japanese had attacked Pearl Harbor. Japan is almost 4,000 miles from Hawaii, so the 353 Japanese aircraft that launched the surprise attack flew from aircraft carriers. Twelve US warships were sunk. 188 aircraft were destroyed, and almost 2,500 personnel were killed. But Popov would have even more to worry about. In Bletchley Park, England, British intelligence had cracked the top-secret code the Germans were using to communicate. This Enigma code was cracked by a team assembled by Stuart Menzies from MI6 and provided them with an insight to the inner workings of Hitler's military machinery. And now codebreakers received chatter about Popov from the Abwehr. Popov hadn't been in contact since the meeting in Rio weeks ago, and now they'd grown suspicious. They were questioning his loyalty. But the British couldn't alert Popov for risk of revealing their code-breaking operation. So they allowed him to return to Portugal and face the music. When he returned to Lisbon, he was surprised to find that von Karstov had been joined by another Abwehr controller. Together they questioned him on his mission. Why hadn't he carried out any of the tasks they'd requested? But he kept supremely calm, telling them all manner of stories to explain his inactivity in the United States. Had the Germans believed him? Three days later, a message was sent to Berlin. It was intercepted by the British at Bletchley Park. The message stated that Popov could still be trusted. The British were astonished, as well as jubilant. Best of all, the Abwehr allowed Popov to resume the Lisbon to London shuttle. He'd not been back for 2 years, but London was a vastly different place to the one he'd known in the winter of 1940. Despite the battering the city had endured at the hands of the Luftwaffe, Londoners were cheerful and optimistic. The tide of the war was turning. By October 1942, Germany was in trouble. Defeat seemed only a matter of time. The Allies were planning a counterattack, the beginning of the end of Hitler. It was to be called Operation Overlord, or D-Day. And key to D-Day preparations was Operation Fortitude, prepared by the Double Cross Committee, and one in which Popov played a central role. Operation Fortitude was a plan for mass deception. The Allies didn't want Hitler to know that the invasion would take place on the Normandy beaches. So they built hundreds of decoy tanks and aircraft. Knowing they'd be visible from German spotter planes, they placed them in strategic locations to convince Hitler that invasion would start in places like Calais and even Norway. Anywhere except Normandy. This sophisticated operation also relied on Popov feeding the Germans false information. On his final trip to Lisbon, Popov presented von Kastov with a dossier about the Allies' order of invasion. It contained misleading information about troop numbers in Britain, giving the false location for 3 armies, 3 army corps, and 23 divisions. That's over 500,000 men. On the 9th of March, Bletchley Park intercepted an Abwehr message describing Popov's intelligence as reliable. As a consequence, 15 divisions, or almost 250,000 German soldiers, were rerouted to Calais. As Popov made his way back to London for the last time, he took with him intelligence about new German secret weapons. Von Kastov had warned him to stay out of London, because in the coming weeks Hitler would unleash his new terror weapon on the British. So Popov gave MI6 the dates of the first attacks by the V-1 flying bomb. But then, with Operation Overlord just 5 weeks away, some disturbing news reached Bletchley Park. Popov's friend Johnny Jebsen had been kidnapped in Lisbon by the Gestapo, who were investigating his finances. The Double Cross Committee were concerned that Jebsen might blow Popov's cover and jeopardize the deception plan for the Normandy landings. But it was too late to postpone D-Day. The 6th of June 1944. 175,000 Allied troops landed on the Normandy beaches. But were they entering a trap? Had Operation Fortitude worked? Or had Johnny Jebsen cracked? Though he'd been tortured by the Gestapo, Jebsen hadn't uttered a word about his true identity or Popov's. D-Day was the beginning of the end for the Nazis. In London, Popov was invited to a celebratory dinner where he was given the seat of honor. It was announced that he was to be awarded the Order of the British Empire. But Popov was in no mood to celebrate. He'd learned that Johnny Jebsen had been shot dead while trying to escape, a common euphemism for murdered.
Hate, cold, bitter, destructive hate, rose in me like fury. I wanted vengeance.
Popov would have his revenge after the war.
Outside Buckingham Palace, crowds cheer themselves hoarse. 7 times during VE Day, the British royal family appeared on the balcony. And the people below were the people of Britain, a people who for 5.5 long years had suffered under the bombs and guns of Nazi Germany.
As Europe rejoiced at victory and the Third Reich collapsed, Popov embarked on his quest. It would be his last mission. He got hold of a British officer's uniform and traveled to Germany. Once there, he scoured the country, inspecting every prisoner of war camp, trying to track down the man responsible for the murder of his friend. Salzer had been commandant of the camp where Jebsen had been killed. In Popov's eyes, he was Johnny's murderer. He tracked him down to the northern town of Minden. There was no one home at the address Popov had been given, so he broke into the house and waited. When Salzer came through the front door, Popov confronted him. He took him to nearby woods and forced the barrel of his pistol deep into his mouth. Could Popov kill again?
I knew I couldn't kill him. I vomited my sins and my shame and my pain.
Dusko Popov started the war a wealthy playboy, incorrigible womanizer, and dedicated gambler. He ended it as one of Germany's most trusted spies and one of Britain's most successful double agents. He fed the Germans a constant stream of doctored military intelligence. His Midas plan drained the Abwehr of $85,000, over $2 million in today's money, and almost the entire cost of running the double-cross committee. Popov's warning about Pearl Harbor may have fallen on deaf ears, but his deception skills were important to the success of D-Day. When he returned to Britain after his attempt to avenge Johnny Jebsen's murder, Dusko Popov was granted British citizenship and awarded his OBE. The presentation was made, appropriately, in the cocktail bar at the Ritz.